Mom, that rust bucket is embarrassing. What will the neighbors think? If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I need to share what happened when my own son said those words to me, standing in his pristine driveway as I climbed out of my beloved 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB. My name is Donna Benedetti, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd earned some respect from my family. I was wrong. That particular Sunday in October started like any other. The autumn air was crisp, and my Ferrari purged beautifully as I downshifted into Marcus's suburban neighborhood. I'd driven this same route to family dinner for 15 years, ever since my husband Roberto passed away. The familiar weight of the steering wheel in my hands, the throaty rumble of the V12 engine, these things brought me comfort. But as I pulled into the circular driveway of my son's McMansion, I noticed something different. Marcus stood waiting by his garage, arms crossed, with that expression I'd come to dread. My daughter-in-law Vanessa flanked him, her lips pursed in disapproval. Even my teenage granddaughter Emma lingered nearby, looking embarrassed. "Hello, family," I said, smoothing my vintage Hermes scarf as I approached. I'd dressed carefully for dinner, choosing a classic navy suit that Roberto had always loved. "Mom, we need to talk," Marcus said, not even greeting me properly. "This car situation has gotten out of hand." Vanessa stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Donna, you're 68. Time to act your age and drive something safe, something appropriate." I felt my chest tighten. The Ferrari wasn't just a car. It was the first one Roberto and I had restored together when we started our business 40 years ago. It was pristine, maintained to perfection, and arguably safer than most modern vehicles due to the meticulous care I lavished upon it. "It's embarrassing, Grandma," Emma added quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Some of my friends saw you drop me off last week, and they were weird about it." The hurt hit me like a physical blow. This car, this beautiful machine that represented decades of passion and expertise, was an embarrassment to them? Marcus continued his assault. "The neighbors have been asking questions. Mrs. Henderson thinks you're going through some kind of phase. And frankly, Mom, you're too old to be driving something so dangerous. One mistake, and you could kill someone. Or yourself," Vanessa added, feigning concern. "We've been researching some wonderful senior-friendly vehicles. Maybe a nice Camry, something reliable and sensible." I stood there, absorbing their words like arrows to my heart. They spoke about me as if I weren't there, as if I were some doddering old fool who couldn't be trusted with her own decisions. The autumn wind whipped around us, and I pulled my coat tighter. "The insurance must be astronomical," Marcus continued. "And the maintenance costs? Mom, you're on a fixed income now. You need to be practical." I looked at each of them, my son, his wife, my granddaughter, and saw the same expression: embarrassment. They were ashamed of me, of my car, of my choices. "I see," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Well, I'll certainly consider your advice." The dinner was torturous. They continued to press their case between courses, presenting printouts of age-appropriate vehicles they'd researched. Sensible sedans with good safety ratings, practical choices for practical old ladies. I smiled and nodded, playing the part they expected. But inside, my mind was working. These people who claimed to love me had no idea who I really was. They saw a frail old woman clinging to an impractical toy. They had no conception of my knowledge, my expertise, or the empire Roberto and I had built together. As I prepared to leave, Marcus walked me to my car. "Promise me you'll think about what we said, Mom. We're only looking out for you." I settled into the driver's seat, the familiar leather embracing me like an old friend. Through the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of my own garage back home, rows of covered shapes that told a very different story than the one my family believed. "Oh, Marcus," I murmured as I started the engine. "I'm going to think about it very carefully indeed." The Ferrari roared to life, and I drove away from their judgment, their small-minded cruelty, and their complete underestimation of exactly who they were dealing with. They wanted me to act my age? They were about to learn that at 68, I was just getting started. The drive home gave me time to think, and by the time I pulled into my own driveway, the hurt had crystallized into something far more dangerous. clarity. I sat in my garage, surrounded by 21 vehicles hidden beneath custom-fitted covers, and let myself remember. If you're feeling frustrated with family members who don't appreciate your worth, you'll understand what I was going through. Subscribe if this resonates with you. I have a feeling many of you have been there. Roberto and I hadn't just owned a Ferrari dealership. We'd built an empire. For 40 years, Benedetti Automotive had been the premier Ferrari restoration house on the West Coast. While everyone assumed Roberto was the mastermind, and I was simply the supportive wife who handled the books, the truth was far more complex. I was the one who identified the diamonds in the rough at estate sales. I was the one who negotiated with collectors across Europe. I understood metallurgy, engine mechanics, and automotive history better than most men half my age. Roberto had the passion, but I had the business acumen and the technical knowledge that made us legendary in the classic car world. 40 years building this collection, I whispered to myself, running my hand along the covered shape of a 1958 250 Testarossa. And they think I'm just a silly old woman. One by one, I pulled back the covers, conducting my monthly inventory. Each car was more than transportation. They were investments, pieces of automotive art, rolling sculptures that had appreciated far beyond what anyone could imagine. The 1967 275 GTB4 they'd mocked tonight. The 1963 250 GTO that had taken us 3 years to authenticate and restore. The 1957 250 TR that Roberto had found in a barn in Tuscany. 20 pristine examples of automotive perfection, each one maintained to Concours standards. I was photographing the VIN numbers for my insurance records when my phone rang. Marcus, probably calling to continue his lecture about sensible transportation choices. Instead, I heard him talking to someone else. He'd butt-dialed me, and through the poor connection, I caught fragments of conversation that made my blood freeze. The lawyer says if we can prove diminished capacity, we can take control of her assets, Marcus was saying to someone. Vanessa, I assumed. She's clearly not making rational decisions anymore. That car thing today proves it. I held my breath, pressing the phone closer to my ear. How much do you think she has? Vanessa's voice was faint, but unmistakable. The house is worth at least $2 million, and there's whatever Dad left her, plus Social Security. She could be sitting on a decent nest egg that she's wasting on automotive fantasies. Automotive fantasies. They had no idea they were discussing a collection worth more than most people's retirement funds. My friend Lisa's mom went through this, Vanessa continued. They got power of attorney, sold all her unnecessary stuff, and moved her into Sunset Manor. Much better for everyone, Sunset Man. Or, I knew that place. A warehouse for forgotten elderly people, charging astronomical fees for the privilege of parking unwanted relatives. The key is documentation, Marcus said. We need witnesses to her erratic behavior. Tonight was perfect. Did you see how defensive she got about that ridiculous car? The call ended, leaving me sitting in my garage, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of automotive history, listening to my own son plot my institutionalization. Oh, my dear son, I said aloud, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. You have no idea what you've just started. I walked to my office, a corner of the garage where I kept all the business records from our dealership days. File cabinets held decades of documentation, purchase receipts, restoration records, provenance papers, insurance appraisals. Every car in this garage had a story, and I had documented each one meticulously. But it wasn't just about the cars. Hidden behind the filing cabinets was a safe containing bearer bonds, cash reserves, and investment records that Roberto and I had accumulated over 4 decades of successful business. We'd been conservative investors, parking money in stable, appreciating assets like real estate and classic automobiles. Marcus thought I was a helpless old woman living on Social Security and his father's modest life insurance policy. He had no idea that I was probably wealthier than he was, that every old junk car in this garage was worth more than his annual salary. I made a decision that night, standing among the automotive treasures that represented my life's work. They wanted to treat me like a diminished old fool? They wanted to seize control of my assets and park me in an institution? They were about to learn exactly what those worthless old cars were worth. And more importantly, they were about to discover that Donna Benedetti was nobody's victim. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to my insurance company, then to my attorney, and finally to a contact I hadn't spoken to in years, James Morrison from Sotheby's Automotive Auction House. If Marcus wanted to play games with my competency, I was going to teach him about underestimating his opponents. But first, I needed to gather some information of my own. The hunt was about to begin. Over the next week, I transformed from hurt mother into something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. I'd learned to be methodical during my 40 years in business, and those skills served me well now. If Marcus and Vanessa wanted to build a case against my mental competency, I needed to understand exactly what they were planning. The first step was documentation. I purchased a small digital recorder, the kind writers use for interviews, and began carrying it everywhere. It amazed me how careless people became when they assumed you were too old and confused to matter. Tuesday morning, Marcus called to check on me, as he put it. "Mom, how are you feeling? Any more thoughts about that car situation?" I could hear Vanessa coaching him in the background, her voice a harsh whisper. "Ask about the grocery shopping and the bills." "Oh, Marcus," I said, injecting just the right amount of frailty into my voice. "I've been thinking about everything you said. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am too old for such things." That's great, Mom. Really sensible. And how are you managing with everything else? Shopping? Household tasks? I played along beautifully. "Well, I did get a bit confused at the market yesterday. Couldn't remember if I'd bought milk or not. Ended up with 3 cartons. A complete lie, but I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "Mom, that's exactly what we're worried about. Maybe Vanessa and I should come over this weekend, help you organize things." After I hung up, I listened to the recording. Perfect clarity. Marcus and Vanessa's voices were clairvoyant. Early audible, including her whispered coaching about what symptoms to look for. The real breakthrough came Thursday afternoon. I was in my garden tending to my roses when I heard voices from Marcus's backyard next door. They were having a conference call on speakerphone, probably thinking the outdoor acoustics would prevent eavesdropping. They were wrong. "The key is establishing a pattern," an unfamiliar male voice was saying. Must be the lawyer Marcus had mentioned. "Confusion about financial matters, difficulty with daily tasks, impulsive decisions regarding valuable possessions." "The car thing is perfect," Vanessa chimed in. "A woman her age insisting on driving something that dangerous? It shows clear, diminished judgment." "Have you cataloged her assets?" the lawyer asked. "We're working on it," Marcus replied. "The house, obviously. Dad's life insurance. Some old business equipment in the garage. Nothing major, but enough to make professional management worthwhile." Business equipment. They thought my Ferrari collection was business equipment. "Once we get power of attorney," Vanessa said, "we can sell off all her junk and get her into a proper facility. Sunset Manor has a waiting list, but they're the best in the area." I had to grip my gardening trowel to keep from storming over there immediately. Instead, I kept listening, kept recording, kept gathering evidence of their systematic plan to strip away my autonomy and warehouse me like unwanted furniture. That evening, I called my old friend Patricia Chen. Patricia and I had worked together for years. She'd handled all the legal aspects of our Ferrari business, from import documentation to estate purchases. If anyone would understand the gravity of what Marcus was attempting, it would be her. "Donna!" Patricia's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "How wonderful to hear from you. How are you managing?" "I need your professional advice, Patricia, and perhaps your legal services." I explained the situation, playing portions of the recordings I'd made. The silence on the other end of the line grew longer and more ominous as she absorbed what she was hearing. "Donna," she said finally, "what they're doing is called elder abuse, and it's illegal. Financial exploitation of an elderly person is a felony in this state. But can they succeed? Can they actually have me declared incompetent?" "Not if you're proactive about it. But Donna, you need to understand, this isn't just about the car anymore. They're planning a complete financial takeover. Once they get power of attorney, they can liquidate everything you own." Everything I owned, including a garage full of priceless Ferraris that they didn't even know existed. "Patricia, I need you to help me teach my family about respect." "What did you have in mind?" I smiled, looking out at my garage where 21 covered shapes waited in the darkness. I'm going to give them exactly what they're asking for, but first, I need some professional assessments and some legal protections. We talked for another hour, laying out a strategy that would protect my assets while simultaneously demonstrating exactly how foolish Marcus and Vanessa had been to underestimate me. The next morning, I made another call, this one to James Morrison at Sotheby's. It was time to find out exactly what my old junk cars were worth in today's market. But first, I had one more recording to make. I discovered that if I called Marcus at precisely 3 p.m., he'd usually be in his car, and his Bluetooth system had a tendency to stay connected even after he thought he'd hung up. "Hi, Mom," he said when I called. "How are you feeling today?" "Oh, much better, dear. I've been thinking about everything you said, about acting my age." "That's wonderful, Mom. Really wonderful." After we said goodbye, I heard him immediately dial another number.
"She's breaking," he told whoever answered. "Completely breaking down. The car thing was just the beginning. I think we can move forward with the competency hearing within the month."
"And then?" Vanessa's voice. "Then we clean house. Get rid of all Dad's old business junk, sell that ridiculous car, and get her somewhere safe. Somewhere she can't make any more bad decisions." I smiled as I turned off the recorder. They wanted to clean house? They wanted to see what Dad's old business junk was worth? Be careful what you wish for, I thought. You might just get it. I knew some of you watching this might be wondering how someone could be so blind to value right in front of them. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age or gender, you know exactly how this feels. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from people who understand what it's like to be dismissed. James Morrison arrived at precisely 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, driving a pristine Mercedes G-Wagon and carrying an aluminum briefcase that screamed serious business. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with the kind of careful precision that comes from handling priceless objects for a living. "Mrs. Benedetti," he said, shaking my hand with surprising warmth. "I have to admit, when you called about a private collection assessment, I wasn't prepared for this." He was staring at my garage, which I'd opened fully for the first time in months. 21 vehicles under custom covers, arranged in precise rows with professional spacing. Even covered, the collection had presence. "Most people aren't," I replied. "Shall we begin?" What followed was 3 hours of the most satisfying vindication I'd experienced in years. With each cover I removed, James's excitement grew more palpable. His hands, protected by white cotton gloves, moved over each car with reverent care, his trained eye cataloging details that most people would miss entirely. "The 1967 275 GTB4, he breathed, running his gloves along the perfect Rosso Corsa paintwork. "This is the car you mentioned? The one your family wants you to sell?" "That old junk car my son wants me to get rid of," I confirmed, unable to keep the irony from my voice. James pulled out a jeweler's loupe and examined the dashboard, the door panels, the engine bay. "Mrs. Benedetti, this is one of the finest examples I've ever seen. The original Barani wire wheels, numbers-matching engine, pristine interior. Someone clearly doesn't understand automotive history." We moved methodically through the collection. Each car had its story, its provenance, its documentation. The 1963 250 GTO that Roberto and I had tracked down in a crumbling villa outside Milan, buying it from a count who needed to pay taxes. The 1958 250 Testarossa that had raced at Le Mans, its engine rebuilt 3 times, but maintaining its original internals. The 1955 410 Super America that had belonged to a Hollywood director, complete with custom Pininfarina bodywork. "How did you acquire such an extraordinary collection?" James asked as he photographed the ENCI in bay of a 1961 250 GT SWGB. 40 years in the business, I said simply. My husband and I knew what to look for, and we understood the market long before it became fashionable. Every car here was either restored by us personally or acquired directly from the original owners. James was taking detailed notes, cross-referencing VIN numbers with his tablet, consulting auction records and price guides. The process was meticulous, professional, and extremely thorough. "Mrs. Benedetti," he said finally, setting down his clipboard and looking at me with something approaching awe. "This is one of the finest private Ferrari collections I've ever encountered. In terms of rarity, condition, and provenance, it rivals major museums. And in terms of value? He consulted his notes, double-checking figures that made him shake his head in disbelief. Conservative auction estimate, assuming current market conditions and accounting for the exceptional documentation you've maintained, $15.7 million. $15.7 million. I let that number settle in the quiet garage air. The 275 GTB4 alone, the car your son called a rust bucket, would bring between 1.6 and 1.8 million at auction. It's possibly the finest unrestored example in existence. I thought about Marcus and Vanessa, plotting to have me declared incompetent so they could sell my junk and park me in Sunset Manor. They thought they were stealing worthless old cars from a confused elderly woman. James, I need this assessment documented. Officially. Of course. Sotheby's will provide a complete written appraisal, suitable for insurance purposes or legal proceedings. May I ask what you're planning? I smiled, thinking about the recordings in my office safe, the evidence of their elder abuse plot, the legal protections Patricia was putting in place. I'm planning to give my family exactly what they've asked for. Over the next week, I made the remaining arrangements. Patricia helped me establish an irrevocable trust to protect the bulk of my assets. I updated my insurance policies, created detailed provenance files for each vehicle, and prepared legal documentation that would make my upcoming gift absolutely binding. Marcus called twice during this period, each time probing for signs of mental decline, each time providing me with more recorded evidence of his plans. He'd scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday, ostensibly to discuss my situation, but actually to present me with papers they'd had prepared by their lawyer. I think you'll find our suggestions very reasonable, Mom, he'd said during our last conversation. We've found some wonderful care options, and we can handle all the complicated financial stuff for you. Complicated financial stuff, like managing a collection worth nearly $16 million. That sounds lovely, dear, I'd replied, playing my part perfectly. I'm so grateful to have family who cares about me. The irony was exquisite. They thought they were manipulating a helpless old woman. Instead, they were walking directly into a trap that would teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. The second family meeting felt different from the moment I arrived. Marcus had arranged the living room like a business conference, with papers spread across the coffee table and chairs positioned to make me feel surrounded. Vanessa sat with a tablet, taking notes. Even Emma was there, probably as a witness to her grandmother's condition. I parked my Ferrari in their driveway with particular care, making sure it gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. After today, everything would change. Mom, thank you for coming, Marcus said, his tone artificially warm. We've been doing some research and we think we've found some solutions to help you. You're right, Marcus, I said, settling into the chair they'd positioned for me, the one that put my back to the window, and their faces in shadow. Amateur interrogation tactics, but they thought they were being clever. I've been thinking about everything you said, about acting my age. Vanessa leaned forward eagerly. That's wonderful, Donna. We knew you'd see reason. In fact, I continued, reaching into my purse for the folder Patricia had prepared, I've decided to take your advice completely about the cars. The folder contained 21 individual ownership transfer documents, each one properly notarized and legally binding. I'd signed them all the previous afternoon in Patricia's office, with her secretary serving as witness. You're right, Marcus. I'm too old for these old cars. I'm giving them all to you. The silence in the room was profound. Marcus's mouth actually fell open. Mom, you're finally being sensible, he managed after a moment. We'll take good care of your collection. Collection. He still had no idea what he was receiving. Oh, I'm sure you will, I said, spreading the documents across their coffee table. Every single one of those worthless old vehicles. Vanessa was practically vibrating with excitement. This is such a mature decision, Donna. Really admirable. Marcus was already reaching for the papers, his eyes scanning the legal language without really reading it. Gift transfer. No consideration. Permanent and irrevocable. All the phrases that made this legally bulletproof. There's a signing ceremony, I explained. Since the transfer involves multiple vehicles, we need witnesses. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a few people to make it official. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Patricia Chen entered, followed by James Morrison from Sotheby's, and finally my longtime accountant, Robert Kim. Monsieur Marcus looked confused by the procession of professionals, but his greed overrode his caution. "Just a formality," I assured him. "I want everything done properly." Patricia laid out the documents with professional efficiency. "Mr. Benedetti, these transfers will give you full legal ownership of 21 vintage Ferrari automobiles currently housed at your mother's residence. Do you understand what you're accepting?" Yes, Marcus said, barely listening. He was already reaching for Patricia's Mont Blanc pen. "Where do I sign?" "Just here," Patricia indicated. "And here, and initial here." I watched my son sign away his future with flourishing penmanship, his excitement palpable. Vanessa was practically bouncing in her chair. Even Emma looked impressed that her grandmother was finally being reasonable. "Excellent," Patricia said, collecting the documents. "Mr. Morrison, as the appraiser of record, would you please confirm what Mr. Benedetti has just accepted ownership of?" James cleared his throat diplomatically. 21 vintage Ferrari automobiles with current estimated auction value of $15.7 million. The pen dropped from Marcus's hand with a small plastic click. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, her voice very small. "Did you say million?" $0.7 million, James confirmed. "Conservative estimate based on current market conditions." Marcus was staring at the signed documents as if they might catch fire. "Wait, what? How much are these cars actually worth?" I smiled, reaching into my purse for the Sotheby's appraisal report. "Well, since you called them worthless junk, I assume you won't mind the $15.7 million valuation for tax purposes." The room went dead silent. Marcus's face had gone the color of old ash. "The 1967 275 GTB4 you wanted me to sell?" I continued pleasantly. "That rust bucket is worth $1.8 million. The 1963 250 GTO is valued at $2.3 million. The 1958 Testarossa—" "Stop," Marcus whispered. "Just stop." But I wasn't finished. "Oh, and there's just one small detail we should discuss about the car's maintenance and storage costs." The look of dawning horror on his face was worth every moment of humiliation he'd put me through. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Marcus stared at the signed documents, then at me, then back at the papers, his mind clearly struggling to process what had just happened. $15.7 million, Vanessa repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Conservative estimate," James confirmed. "Some of these vehicles are essentially priceless. The 250 GTO, for instance, hasn't been offered at public auction in over a decade. Private sales have exceeded $3 million. Marcus finally found his voice. "Mom, you didn't know," I finished for him. "Of course you didn't. You thought I was a confused old woman with some junk cars taking up garage space." Patricia was organizing the signed documents with professional satisfaction. Everything was legal, binding, and permanent. "Now, about those ongoing costs I mentioned," I continued, consulting the folder Robert Kim had prepared. "The annual insurance alone is $180,000. Storage and climate control runs about $45,000 yearly. Then there's maintenance. These are not cars you can take to Jiffy Lube, Marcus." "How much?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Professional maintenance, using only period-correct parts and certified Ferrari specialists, runs approximately $95,000 annually. That's assuming no major restoration work." The mathematical reality was hitting him like a freight train. Nearly $275,000 per year in carrying costs on cars he couldn't afford to maintain and couldn't afford to sell. "But wait," Vanessa said desperately. "He can just sell them, right? I mean, if they're worth that much." Robert Kim spoke for the first time. "The gift tax implications are significant. Based on current IRS regulations, Mr. Benedetti will owe approximately $4.2 million in federal gift taxes within 9 months of the transfer date." Marcus made a sound like a deflating balloon. $4.2 million, I repeated helpfully. "Due by next April 15th, plus state taxes, of course." "I don't have $4 million, Marcus shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. Well, you could sell some of the cars to pay the taxes, I suggested. Of course, that sale would generate additional capital gains taxes, and finding qualified buyers for vehicles of this caliber takes time, often years. Meanwhile, you're responsible for insurance, storage, and maintenance on the remaining vehicles. The trap was perfect. Marcus now owned assets he couldn't afford to keep and couldn't afford to sell. Every day he delayed cost him money he didn't have. "Mom, please," he said, reaching for the documents. "I can't. We need to undo this." I shook my head sadly. "Oh, Marcus, I'm afraid all sales are final. You signed the papers, accepted ownership, and transferred title. These cars are legally yours now." Vanessa was frantically calculating on her tablet. "The insurance alone is more than our mortgage payment, and if we have to pay taxes on $15 million... Bankruptcy?" Patricia said matter-of-factly. "Almost certainly bankruptcy." Marcus buried his face in his hands. "I can't afford this. I can't afford any of this." "Well," I said, standing and smoothing my skirt, "I suppose this is a learning moment about the difference between price and value, about the importance of understanding what you're dealing with before you act." "You planned this," Marcus said, looking up at me with something approaching awe. "You actually planned this whole thing." "I prefer to thin. Think of it as responding appropriately to circumstances," I replied. "You wanted to have me declared incompetent so you could seize control of my assets. You thought I was too old and confused to manage my own affairs. You wanted to sell my junk and warehouse me in an institution." The room was silent, except for the sound of Vanessa's frantic typing. "So I decided to give you exactly what you asked for. My old worthless cars. All of them." Marcus was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're not confused at all, are you?" "Marcus, I built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. I've been collecting and restoring Ferraris since before you were born. Did you really think I couldn't handle you?" The boy who had mocked my rust bucket just 3 weeks ago was now facing financial ruin because of his own greed and ignorance. "However," I said, adjusting my purse strap, "I'm not entirely without mercy. I might consider helping you with your dilemma. But that would require some changes in our relationship." "What kind of changes?" Marcus asked desperately. "We'll discuss that next week. Right now, I think you need some time to fully appreciate your new acquisitions." I headed for the door, leaving behind a room full of people grappling with the most expensive lesson they'd ever received. Outside, my 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB waited in their driveway, its Rosso Corsa paint gleaming in the afternoon sun, the car Marcus had called a rust bucket, the car worth more than his house. I started the engine and smiled as the V12 roared to life. Sometimes the best revenge was simply giving people exactly what they thought they wanted. Marcus called me at 6 a.m. the next morning. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring each desperate chime. "Mom, please, we need to talk." "Good morning, Marcus. How are you enjoying your new collection?" A strangled sound came through the phone. "Mom, I've been up all night. The insurance company wants a certified appraisal and climate-controlled storage verification before they'll even quote me coverage. And the tax attorney I called... Jesus, Mom. The tax attorney wanted a $50,000 retainer just to begin working on this." "Welcome to the world of high-end automotive collecting," I said pleasantly. "It's not for amateurs." "I can't do this. I can't afford any of this." "Well, that's unfortunate. Those cars need proper care, Marcus. Any reduction in their maintenance standards could significantly impact their value. And then there's the security concern. 21 vintage Ferraris in an unprotected garage? I imagine your homeowner's insurance is having some interesting conversations about liability coverage." 3 hours later, he was at my door with Vanessa in tow. Both of them looked like they hadn't slept, and Vanessa's usual perfect appearance was noticeably disheveled. "Mom, we need to talk about this situation," Marcus began. "Which situation would that be?" I asked, ushering them into my living room, the same room where they'd planned to present me with competency papers and care facility brochures. "You know what situation," Vanessa snapped, her composure finally cracking. "This is insane. No one just gives away $15 million worth of cars." "I didn't give them away," I corrected. "I transferred ownership to my son, exactly as he requested. He wanted to manage my assets because he thought I was too incompetent to make rational decisions." Marcus was pacing like a caged animal. "But you knew what would happen.
You knew I couldn't afford the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance.
Did I? You seemed so confident about managing my financial affairs. I assumed you'd done the proper research. I walked to my desk and retrieved a folder I'd prepared the night before. Actually, Marcus, now that you mention research, I should share some of the investigating I've been doing. I pressed play on my digital recorder. Marcus's voice filled the room, clear and damning. The lawyer says if we can prove diminished capacity, we can take control of her assets. Marcus went pale. Mom, you recorded our conversations? Just the relevant portions, I said, pressing play again. This time, it was Vanessa's voice. Once we get power of attorney, we can sell all her junk and get her into Sunset Manor. That's illegal, Vanessa stammered. Actually, it's not. I'm legally entitled to record conversations in my own home, especially when they involve criminal conspiracy. I pulled out another document. Patricia has confirmed that what you two have been planning constitutes elder abuse under state law. Financial exploitation of an elderly person is a Class C felony. The silence was profound. You have two choices, Marcus, I continued, my voice steady and implacable. Option 1. I turn these recordings over to the district attorney's office. Patricia assures me that the evidence is sufficient for criminal charges. Elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You'd both be looking at significant prison time. Marcus slumped into a chair, as if his legs had given out. Or option 2, you accept responsibility for your actions, make appropriate amends, and learn to treat your mother with the respect she's earned over 68 years of life. What kind of amends? Marcus asked quietly. First, a public apology. At next Sunday's family dinner, in front of Emma, and whoever else you've been telling about my supposed dementia, you'll explain exactly what happened here and acknowledge that you completely misjudged your mother's competency. Vanessa started to object, but I held up my hand. Second, you'll enroll in automotive history and restoration courses. If you're going to own one of the world's great Ferrari collections, you'll learn to appreciate what you have. I won't have ignorance dishonoring your father's legacy. And third, I continued, Vanessa will remove herself entirely from any discussions involving family finances. Her involvement in this scheme has permanently disqualified her from having input into Benedetti family matters. You can't do that, Vanessa protested. I can and I will. These are my terms. Accept them or face the criminal charges you've earned. Marcus looked at his wife, then back at me. And if we agree to your terms, then I'll help you solve your little tax problem. The Ferrari collection will be transferred to a charitable trust that I'll establish. You'll receive the tax deduction for the donation, which will offset most of the gift tax liability. The cars will remain in the family, properly maintained and displayed, but under professional management. And the criminal charges will remain our little secret, as long as you honor the spirit and letter of our agreement. Marcus buried his face in his hands. You planned this whole thing from the beginning, didn't you? Son, I built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. I've negotiated with collectors, dealers, and auction houses around the world. I've restored automotive masterpieces and preserved priceless pieces of history. Did you really think I couldn't outmaneuver my own child? The question hung in the air like smoke. You're not the person I thought you were, Marcus said finally. No, I agreed. I'm not the helpless old woman you wanted me to be. I'm the woman who raised you, who built the foundation that allowed you to live comfortably, who deserved your respect instead of your scheming. Vanessa was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. All this time you've been, what, pretending to be confused? I've been observing, learning, planning, and waiting for you to reveal exactly who you really are. Marcus stood up slowly, his decision made. We'll do it. The apology, the classes, everything. Just please help us fix this. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I thought you might see reason. After all, the alternative is spending the next 5 to 10 years in state prison. As they left, defeated and humbled, I reflected on how completely the dynamic had shifted. 3 weeks ago, I'd been the embarrassing old mother with the inappropriate car. Now I was the family matriarch whose intelligence and resources commanded respect. Sometimes the best lessons are the most expensive ones. The following Sunday's family dinner was unlike any we'd ever had. Marcus had invited the same relatives who'd witnessed my humiliation 3 weeks earlier, his sister Carol, her husband Jim, and their teenage kids. The same people who'd nodded sympathetically when he complained about my dangerous driving habits. I arrived in the Ferrari, as always, but this time, Marcus met me in the driveway with something approaching reverence. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying none of its previous condescension. "Let me help you with that." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, accepting his offered arm with dignity. Inside, the family was gathered around the same dining room table where they'd staged their intervention. But the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. "Everyone," Marcus said, his voice tight with embarrassment, "I need to apologize for some things I said about Mom. Some assumptions I made." Carol looked puzzled. "What assumptions?" Marcus glanced at me, and I nodded encouragingly. This was his moment to own his mistakes. "I told you all that Mom was having problems with her judgment, that she was too old to drive safely, that she needed help managing her affairs. I was wrong. Completely, embarrassingly wrong." The room was quiet except for the soft clink of silverware. "Mom isn't having any cognitive problems," Marcus continued. "She's not confused or incompetent. In fact, she's probably the smartest person in this room, and I owe her a public apology for treating her like a child instead of recognizing her for who she is." "Marcus," Carol said slowly, "what are you talking about? The Ferrari collection that Dad left her? The one I called junk cars? It's worth $15.7 million. Mom gave the entire collection to me as a gift, and I nearly went bankrupt because I was too ignorant to understand what I was receiving." The silence was profound. Emma, bless her, was the first to speak. "Grandma, you have $15 million worth of cars?" "I did," I said gently. "Now they belong to your father, though he's discovered that owning something and being able to afford it are two very different things." Jim whistled low. "Jesus, Marcus. 15 million? The 1967 275 GTB she drives, the car I called a rust bucket. It's worth $1.8 million, Marcus said, his voice heavy with shame. "I mocked my mother for driving a car worth more than my house." Carol was staring at me with new eyes. "Donna, you never said anything about what? My financial situation? My business knowledge? The empire Roberto and I built together?" I smiled sadly. "Would any of you have listened? Or would you have assumed I was bragging or confused or living in the past?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. "Mom, I'm sorry," Marcus said, and this time the apology was genuine. "I never understood what you built or who you really are. I saw an old woman instead of recognizing the accomplished businesswoman who raised me." "Respect isn't about age, son," I replied. "It's about recognizing someone's worth, someone's contributions, someone's right to make their own decisions about their own life." Vanessa, who had been notably quiet throughout dinner, finally spoke. I won't interfere with family matters anymore, Donna. That's not my place." "No," I agreed. "It's not." Over the following months, Marcus kept his word in ways that surprised me. He enrolled in automotive history courses at the local community college, studying with the dedication of a man who'd learned the cost of ignorance. He read voraciously about Ferrari's racing heritage, about the engineering innovations that made each model unique, about the restoration techniques that preserved automotive art. Most importantly, he began to see the cars not as assets to be managed, but as pieces of history to be preserved. The charitable trust Patricia established solved the immediate tax crisis while ensuring the collection would remain intact for future generations. Marcus became the collection's curator, learning proper maintenance protocols and developing genuine appreciation for what his father and I had assembled. "Mom," he said one evening as we worked together on the 1963 250 GTO, "will you teach me about this car's racing history?" "Now you're asking the right questions, son," I replied, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my child's growth. 6 months after the gift, Marcus started a blog called Lessons from the Garage. His first post was titled, "My mother is the smartest person I know, and I was too foolish to see it." The post went viral within days, shared by thousands of people who recognized their own family dynamics in our story. Marcus received hundreds of comments from adult children who admitted they'd made similar assumptions about their aging parents. But the comment that moved me most was from Emma. "My grandma is officially the coolest person in our family, and my dad finally figured that out." The Ferrari collection became a source of family pride rather than embarrassment. Marcus organized small private showings for automotive enthusiasts, always crediting the vision and expertise that had assembled such an extraordinary group of vehicles. "My mother and father spent 40 years building this collection," he would tell visitors. "Every car has a story, and she knows them all." The family dynamic had permanently shifted. I was no longer the aging burden they needed to manage, but the matriarch whose wisdom and experience commanded respect. When I drove to Sunday dinner now, Marcus would park beside me in whichever Ferrari he was currently studying, eager to discuss what he'd learned about its provenance or racing history. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons are the ones that cost us everything we thought we knew about the people we love. 1 year after the gift, I found myself in a place I'd never expected to be, genuinely happy with my family relationships. Marcus had completed his automotive history coursework with a focus that impressed his instructors. More importantly, he'd developed a real passion for the subject that went far beyond financial considerations. When he talked about the 1958 250 Testarossas Le Mans victories or the engineering innovations in the 275 GTB-4's independent rear suspension, his enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. "Mom, did you know that our 1962 250 GTO is one of only 36 ever built?" he asked one Saturday morning as we worked together in the garage. "And the racing provenance documentation you maintained is apparently some of the best in existence." I smiled, watching him carefully apply wax to the car's perfect red flanks. "Your father and I spent 3 years tracking down every piece of that car's history. The original owner in Italy, the racing team that campaigned it in 1963, even the mechanic who rebuilt the engine after its crash at Monza. This was what I'd always hoped for, sharing knowledge instead of defending competence, teaching instead of protecting assets." Marcus had evolved from someone who saw dollar signs to someone who understood cultural significance. The blog he'd started had grown into something more substantial. Lessons from the Garage now attracted thousands of regular readers, many of them adult children working to rebuild relationships with their parents. Marcus wrote honestly about his mistakes, about the assumptions he'd made, about the education he'd received in respecting his elders. His most popular post was titled, "The Day I Inherited $15 million and Nearly Lost Everything." It detailed our entire story, the family dinner humiliation, his plots with Vanessa, the gift, and the expensive lesson that followed. The comments section had become a support group for families dealing with similar dynamics. "I've gotten emails from people all over the world," Marcus told me one afternoon. Adult children apologizing to their parents, elderly parents feeling validated in their own struggles. "What you taught me, it's helping other families too." That meant more to me than any financial success ever had. Emma, now 19 and home from college, had become genuinely fascinated by the collection's history. She was majoring in art history with a focus on industrial design, and she'd written her freshman research paper on the evolution of Ferrari's aesthetic philosophy from the 1940s through the 1960s. "Grandma," she said, finding me in the garage where I was reviewing maintenance records, "will you tell me about how you and Grandpa found the 250 GT Tour de France? I want to include that story in my presentation." These conversations, these moments of genuine connection, were worth more than all the Ferraris combined. Vanessa had kept her word about staying out of family financial matters, but more than that, she'd developed a grudging respect for what she now understood about my capabilities. She'd even started bringing her own elderly mother to our family dinners, treating the older woman with newfound consideration. "I realized I was heading down the same path with my own mom," she'd admitted to me quietly, making assumptions about what she could handle, treating her like she was fragile instead of experienced. The Ferrari collection had found its proper home in the charitable foundation Patricia had established. The cars were maintained to museum standards, occasionally displayed at automotive events, and used for educational purposes that honored Roberto's memory while sharing our passion with new generations of enthusiasts. But more importantly, they'd become the foundation for genuine family relationships built on respect rather than manipulation. "Mom," Marcus said as we finished waxing the 250 GTO, "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately. About what he'd think of all this." "What do you think he'd think?" I asked. Marcus considered this carefully. "I think he'd be proud that his collection is being preserved properly. But mostly, I think he'd be happy that we're working together again. That we're a real family instead of people just going through the motions." I felt tears prick my eyes. He would be proud. Of the collection, of the foundation, but mostly of the man you've become. "I had a good teacher," Marcus said. "Eventually." 6 months later, Marcus enrolled in a master's program in museum studies with a specialization in automotive history. His goal was to transform our private collection into a proper museum that would educate future generations about Ferrari's engineering and cultural significance. "The Benedetti Automotive Museum," he said, showing me his thesis proposal. "Honoring the vision of Roberto and Donna Benedetti, preserving automotive artistry for posterity." As I read through his carefully researched plans, I realized that what had started as a lesson in respect had become something much larger. A legacy that would outlive us all. The boy who had once mocked my rust bucket was now planning to dedicate his career to preserving automotive history. The son who had tried to have me declared incompetent was now seeking advanced degrees to better honor what his parents had built. Sometimes, the best gifts are the ones that teach us who we really are. Now, 1 year later, as I prepare to share this story with all of you, I want you to understand something important. This was never really about the cars. The Ferraris were just the vehicle, if you'll pardon the expression, for a much more important lesson about family, respect, and the dangerous assumptions we make about the people we love. I know many of you watching this have experienced something similar. Maybe not with vintage automobiles, but with family members who dismissed your capabilities, who made decisions about your life without consulting you, who confused age with incompetence or vulnerability with weakness. Never underestimate someone because of their age. Wisdom and experience are the most valuable collections of all. When Marcus and Vanessa looked at me, they saw an elderly woman who needed management, protection, supervision. They never saw the businesswoman who had spent 40 years navigating complex negotiations, the expert who could spot a fake Ferrari from across a parking lot, the strategist who could outthink opponents half her age. Their assumptions nearly cost them everything. But here's what I learned in return. Even when people disappoint us, even when they betray our trust, it's possible to rebuild relationships on a foundation of genuine respect. Marcus didn't just apologize for his actions. He fundamentally changed his understanding of who I am and what I'm capable of. The Ferrari collection continues to grow in value, but more importantly, it's brought our family together in ways I never expected. 3 generations now work side by side, in that garage, sharing knowledge, preserving history, and building relationships that will outlast any material possession. Emma graduated last month with honors, her senior thesis exploring the intersection of automotive design and cultural identity. She's been accepted to graduate school, where she'll study museum curation, planning to someday manage the Benedetti collection professionally. Marcus completed his master's degree and is now working with architects to design a proper museum facility. The Benedetti Automotive Museum will open next year, featuring not just our cars, but educational programs about automotive history, restoration techniques, and family legacy preservation. But the real success isn't measured in dollars or degrees. It's measured in the Sunday dinners, where Marcus asks thoughtful questions about carburetor specifications, where Emma shares stories about her college presentations, where Vanessa treats me as an equal rather than a burden. Respect isn't something you lose with age, it's something you earn over a lifetime. I want to leave you with this thought. Look around your own family. Are there elderly relatives you've been treating like children? Parents whose opinions you dismiss because they seem out of touch with modern life? Grandparents whose stories you haven't bothered to hear? Every older person in your life has decades of experience, knowledge, relationships, and wisdom that took a lifetime to accumulate. They've navigated challenges you haven't faced yet, solved problems you can't imagine, and survived circumstances that would test anyone's capabilities. Before you make assumptions about what they can handle or decisions about what's best for them, remember that they were managing complex lives long before you were born. The elderly aren't broken young people. They're experienced humans who deserve the same respect and autonomy you expect for yourself. My Ferrari collection is now valued at over $18 million, but the most valuable thing I own is the respect of my family. Respect I had to fight for, plan for, and ultimately teach them to give. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is the opportunity to see us clearly, to understand our worth, and to choose respect over control. Thanks for listening to my story. If this resonates with you, please subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments. Tell me about the elderly people in your life who deserve more recognition, more respect, more appreciation for everything they've accomplished. And remember, never judge a book by its cover, never assume age equals incompetence, and never underestimate a woman who spent 40 years building something extraordinary. Whether it's vintage Ferraris or vintage wisdom, some collections only improve with age. Drive carefully, treat your elders with respect, and always remember that every old car has a story, just like every old person has wisdom worth hearing. Until next time, this is Donna Benedetti, reminding you that the most valuable things in life aren't always the most obvious ones.